Good evening and welcome to Take Back the Night 2021, hosted by SOS and ESU Thrive. My name is Jen Ogilby and I am the sexual assault victim advocate here at SOS. I am joined by Sherry Crisp. She is our advocate for the underserved populations at SOS. As advocates, we assist survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, stalking through moral and emotional support, safety planning, safety awareness, safe and secure shelter, court and other professional accompaniment, assistance with filing protection orders, as well as providing prevention education within the community. Take Back the Night is an annual event that raises awareness, empowers individuals, and inspires action to end sexual violence. Since its inception in the 1870s, women all over the world have come together once a year to address violence against women. Over the decades, it has evolved into a night of sharing, healing, and empowerment. Nearly 1 in 5 women will experience completed or attempted rape in their lifetime. 1 in 3 female victims experienced assault between the ages of 11 and 17. 1 in 8 women were raped before the age of 10. And 1 in 38 men will experience completed or attempted rape in their lifetime. 1 in 4 men will experience sexual assault around the ages of 11 and 17, while 1 in 4 men experience sexual assault before the age of 10. And as we already know, those numbers are not correct, even though they are from the CDC, because as we know, sexual assault widely goes unreported due to many reasons, stigma being one of the main. Tonight, we will be exploring different methods of healing, assault in underserved populations, community resources, and more importantly, we are honored to be joined by survivors who will share their own experience and journey. But before I begin, I would like to take a moment to thank Sandy and Brian from the ESU IT department for their technical assistance. A great big thank you to Monique Harris and Lyra Wallace from Thrive, my fellow advocates and SOS staff for their time, expertise, and support. Thank you, Kayla Mock of Trox Gallery and Gifts on Commercial for her help with the artistic portion of this event, as well as her willingness to share her story tonight. Last but not least, to everyone in attendance, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. If you have any questions, please submit those at emporia.edu/live. Well, I'd also like you to know that while advocates wear many hats during the day, we are not therapists, we're not attorneys, holistic practitioners. So if you would like any more information on these topics, please reach out and we can provide those community resources. Also, we are sitting here without a mask. Sherry and I have both received both of our vaccines. So we are not trying to be just completely irresponsible. We've been vaccinated. Thank you so much for attending. We'll move on to the next slide now. Discussing tonight can be very difficult, very heavy, and if at any point this evening you are feeling the need to reach out, the need to speak to someone, feeling in any type of way, please don't hesitate to reach out to 1-800-825-1295. That is our helpline, and we have several advocates standing by to address any needs or questions or concerns you may have. Catherine Martin, the SOS therapist, is doing the questions right now, so she's also available if you need to speak to her as well. Healing looks different to many people. So what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for another's. We'll often hear things like healing is not linear, and it's easy to write phrases like that off as very cliche, but from my own personal experience, I know that it's very true. Catherine Martin is the SOS therapist and program coordinator, and we are excited that she was able to participate in tonight's event. Catherine will be discussing some of the more traditional methods of healing, as well as exploring what trauma is and how it affects us. So without further ado, Catherine Martin.
Hello, my name is Catherine Martin, and I am the therapist and program coordinator at SOS. I am a recent graduate of Emporia State University. I got my master's in clinical counseling with an emphasis in mental health. I graduated in December 2020. I am going to talk to you guys a little bit about trauma, cognitive behavioral therapy, and coping skills today. Everyone that I serve here is a client of SOS in some capacity. So they may have come in through our shelter. They may have, come in through crisis services. Maybe they are in CASA. There's a lot of different ways they could have come in through any of our different services that we offer. A lot of these clients, unfortunately, have experienced trauma. And, trauma can vary from person to person, but I'm going to read you guys a definition of trauma that I found and really like. A powerful emotional response to a distressing event such as war, an accident, the unexpected loss of a loved one, or abuse. Trauma can continue to cause both emotional and physical symptoms for many years after the event has concluded. So there are multiple things in that sentence that stand out to me, about it being a strong emotional response. And then also it could potentially last for many years after the event has concluded. That's kind of a scary thought. So, when we experience these symptoms, it's so important that we pay attention to them and treat them as they are. So, some risk factors of trauma are that the trauma experience was unexpected. So, if the event we had wasn't expected, which a lot of traumatic events are not expected. We don't expect abuse. We don't expect to be injured or be in an accident. So that can be a risk factor. If the victim of the trauma has had past traumas, that can also be a risk factor. And if the experience happened repeatedly or over a prolonged period of time, that can also add another layer as well. And if the trauma occurred in childhood, so you may have heard of the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences, and that is a little questionnaire that we can ask people, questions to learn about their childhood and kind of use that to figure out what they may be at risk for down the line as far as health concerns and other things. So if they feel hopeless during the experience of the trauma, that can also be a risk factor. And then lastly, if they're dealing with other major stressors that are unrelated to the trauma. So if they've got multiple things going on, that can also be. So some symptoms of trauma are avoidance of trauma reminders. So, having memories, you may try and push that down or, not revisit a specific place or be around a person. Also, something that's really important to know is that symptoms of trauma look so different for everyone. So, me and my friend may have been through the same trauma, but our symptoms look way different. And there's no wrong way to go through trauma. So, flashbacks to the traumatic event may also occur, and an exaggerated startle response. So, something that maybe didn't scare you before might startle you now. Distressing dreams and other sleep problems might occur. You might sleep a lot longer than usual or have trouble falling asleep. Irritability, anger, and other negative emotions can also happen, and those can be really tough to deal with. Self-blame regarding the traumatic event is another symptom, which is really difficult. A lot of our survivors experience self-blame, and it's not their fault. It's not the victim's fault, and that's really difficult for them to, really understand. So there's some different ways to treat trauma. One of them is cognitive behavioral therapy, which we call CBT also. It's common and well supported for trauma and for other things as well. It works by identifying and challenging unhealthy thinking patterns that contribute to your symptoms of trauma. So the benefits of this can be really long lasting and just really great and beneficial. Medication can sometimes be helpful as well. And then there are other treatments like ART or EMDR, which are eye movement therapies. I'm going to talk a little bit about CBT. Okay, so cognitive behavioral therapy. So you experience something. That's how it starts out. There's a situation. Then you have a thought. surrounding it. So, using thought, you interpret the situation. So these interpretations are not always accurate. That's the thing. There are many ways to think about a situation. So sometimes it's easy to jump to, what did I do wrong? Why are they mad? And an alternate thought might be, they didn't even notice. She must have a lot on her mind. Then there are feelings surrounding what happened. So you experience emotions based on your thoughts about the situation. So if you are hurt or offended, maybe you're unfazed, maybe you're neutral. There are multiple ways to feel. And then there's a behavior. So you respond to the situation based on your thoughts and feelings. So, the situation happens, you have a thought about it, then you have a feeling about it, and then you behave based on those. So, maybe you are thinking about something so much you can't stop thinking about it, so you acted coldly. Or maybe you didn't think about it again. Maybe you wouldn't give it a second thought, so you acted fine when you saw the person again. It's just something, it's practicing. Using hypothetical situations to walk through these steps can sometimes be helpful. Again, doing this type of therapy with a counselor or therapist can be really helpful as well, so they can help guide you. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very helpful for trauma because it can kind of help you realize, okay, this was my thought, this is the feeling, and then this is why I behaved this way. How can I reframe that? Do something different. There are lots of awesome worksheets you can do on it and helpful things as well. So for therapy, I would highly recommend obviously seeing a therapist if you would like to. As a therapist, I'm always going to recommend that. If you are a client of SOS, I can happily help you. If you are not, we have plenty of other resources in Emporia. So on campus at Emporia State University, we have a student wellness center and they have counseling services there. So I think the first 5, I believe, sessions are free. And then after that, it's very, very affordable. So make sure you check that out. It's absolutely worth it. They have some great therapists there. They can help you. And then we also have a community mental health center, Crosswinds Counseling and Wellness in town, and they have interns there that can also help you free of charge. You can also see a licensed practitioner, and they have sliding fee scales as well. We also have a lot of private practice people in town, and I'm sure there's even more resources that I'm not thinking of. So please don't let finances or other things be a barrier for you for getting help that you need. It's absolutely important. If you need any help at all connecting with resources, please don't hesitate to ask us. We're happy to help connect you. The very last thing I want to talk about is coping skills. So developing those coping skills is so essential so that you can do some things on your own to try and help cope with the trauma. So I'm curious what you think about when you think of coping skills. Just take a minute and think about it. So this is a word that we use a lot as well. And basically, we're going to try and develop some coping skills of our own. And these things can be really anything. Everyone's coping skills can be different. So it's something that we can use when we are feeling unpleasantly. So, if this trauma is really bothering us, if we're having those unpleasant emotions, we can use these coping skills to help, get us out of there. Obviously, we can't wave a magic wand and fix these problems. If we could, that would be great, but unfortunately we can't. So developing coping skills is really the next best thing. So someone's coping skills might be to take a warm bath, light a candle, relax, turn their phone off. That might be super helpful for someone to unwind, really relax. Someone, maybe all they need is to take a few deep breaths. Maybe they need to shut their office door for a minute, take some deep breaths, and they're recentered. They're okay. Sometimes going for a walk can help. Discovering your own coping skills can take trial and error, but finding out what works for you is so important. So I challenge you to go find what coping skills work for you. One of my personal favorites is petting my cats. I always feel very relaxed. It makes me very happy to just hang out and pet my cats. So I'm going to challenge you to do that. And just a reminder, you are important. You are valuable. You do hard things and you are strong. If you need help, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Catherine Martin, for doing that for us. And like we said earlier, what works for one person may not necessarily work for another. So Erica will be sharing with us some of her experiences with holistic healing. Erica is the SOS Criminal Justice Coordinator for SOS. And in her own healing journey, she has found that holistic methods of healing is what work best for her. So in the next video, Erica will share some of what these methods are and how they work for her. So no further ado.
Hello all, I'm Erica. I am currently the Criminal Justice Coordinator at SOS. I am also a trauma survivor. I am currently on my own healing journey in a new season, as I like to call it. I arrived to this journey by feeling complacent in traditional talk therapy. I was finding myself in a cycle of starting and stopping therapy and hoping for something to be different the next go around. Something in me finally decided, maybe I needed to take a new approach, maybe challenge myself, get out of my comfort zone a little bit. So I decided then to lean into more of a holistic approach. Like my journey, many survivors of trauma may also find themselves stuck in a cycle of trauma responses, stuck in that fight or flight mode. We know trauma manifests in our bodies when we do not allow them to be seen or expressed. These can and do come out in a variety of symptoms. While traditional talk therapy works and is incredibly beneficial, it's not the only form out there. Healing is not a one-size-fits-all, nor is it linear, like we have heard many times before. Holistic and somatic healing is connecting the mind, body, and soul, addressing the multiple layers of pent-up trauma in the body and allowing us to return to ourselves. So holistic practices can look like yoga, Reiki, acupuncture, meditation, body movement therapy, and art. Now, that's not all of the different forms of holistic healing, that's just a few. So you may be familiar with yoga. Yoga can become an avenue in which a trauma survivor through practice can become more connected to their body. This can help build self-awareness and create or further a path of healing. Trauma does not always go away, especially sexual trauma. Many survivors hold on to those experiences in their body, even if their brain has blocked that memory out. Through movement and breath work, someone can find a new sense of connectedness to their body, which this is super significant work because following trauma, it's very common to see a survivor experience disassociation, numbness, hypervigilance, just to name a few. One other one that I mentioned was Reiki. So some of you may have heard of Reiki, some of you may have not. Reiki is a form of energy healing, and it is typically performed by a practitioner. This practice requires you to let go of the control, which was very, very hard for me to do because control helps me feel safe. You have to allow the physical and emotional sensations to come through as much as they arise, as long as you feel safe and ready to do so. So Reiki tackles the chakras in your body. We have 7 main chakra points in our body, which are just points of energy within us. We all have them. So when we experience trauma, our chakras become blocked or imbalanced. For me, this often looked like functioning out of fear constantly. I had pent-up trauma for almost my entire life. So my Reiki session was a huge emotional release, accompanied by, of course, physical sensations. It was also where I was able to create a safe home of self-love and worthiness at my core to return back to whenever I needed it. In this session, I was able to dump out all of the gunk and blockages and begin to show up as my authentic self, which has led me to a path of feeling more comfortable and accepting of myself than I have ever felt before. For the first time in my life, I have begun to feel stronger than my trauma and safe in my own body. So I know I only went through 2 forms very quickly of healing, but if anything I have said resonates with you or sparks an interest, look into it. Look into holistic healing and know that we do have local practitioners here in our area. And most importantly, know that you are worthy of finding a path of healing that works for you. It is not a one size fits all. If you've tried talk therapy and maybe you're finding yourself in that cycle of starting and stopping, or maybe you're feeling like you're still living on autopilot, get out there and look for other avenues to take. You are worthy of finding that right healing practice for you. Thanks.
For sharing. We will now hear from a survivor of sexual assault. But first, why is it important to listen to survivor stories? Why is it so important for those of us who have a story, share our story? Former U.S. gymnast Rachel Haynes says, silence around sexual abuse leads to more abuse. If other survivors hadn't gone public with their descriptions of abuse, I would have never truly understood how I was a victim at all. It is the conversation that creates awareness. It is the act of coming forward and sharing that defines the line between what is acceptable and what is abuse. If society refuses to discuss the actions of the abuser, the abused have no way of knowing if their feelings of discomfort they experienced are valid. Jennifer Williamson is the author of Sharing is Daring, Notes on the Healing Power of Vulnerability. While sharing her own story of assault, she describes sharing as an act of courage when it requires vulnerability. It is not easy to send your story out into the world. The ones bearing their soul are the ones who are learning how to find safety in vulnerability. That is how we find refuge in each other. Don't hide what you might heal. Your story makes the world more well-rounded, more real. Sharing is letting go of every should and opening all the ways you can be seen, shame taking a backseat. From there, you have a chance at real freedom. Wonder replaces isolation. Vulnerability becomes your safety net. You get to live. We will now be hearing from Kayla Mock. Kayla is a graduate of ESU and the owner of Trucks Gallery and Gifts at 729 Commercial. She is also the founder of Emporia First Friday and sits on the board of directors at SOS. Tonight, she is going to share her own story. Due to its graphic nature, if you feel you need a break, please feel free to step away from the program. Reach out to speak to Catherine Martin or dial 1-800-825-1295 to be connected to an SOS advocate. It is Kayla's journey to empowerment that has inspired me the most, and I hope it will inspire you as well.
So what's your name and where are you from?
My name is Kayla Mock and I am from Emporia, Kansas. I'm a small business owner. I own Trucks Gallery and Gifts in downtown Emporia, and I also co-founded the Emporia First Friday Art Walk that I help organize every month.
And today we're going to be talking about a really personal story for you. And while you've been really open about what happened to you, it's something that a lot of people may not know the full extent of what happened. So, Kayla, can you tell me what happened to you?
Yeah. It was July 25th, 1999. I was 16 years old. It was a summer night. I had gone out with a bunch of my friends. We did the thing where you throw a keg in the back of a pickup truck and drive out to a country road and sit around and drink really foamy beer and hang out. So after that, my friends drove me home to my dad's apartment building. They drove off before they made sure I got in. And my dad and I kind of had a system worked out where I would go around to the back of his building and knock on his windows, and then he would, come around to let me in the building because we didn't have a spare key, and we'd been doing that forever. So that particular night, I went back, into this little courtyard and knocked on the windows, and he didn't hear me. And while I was back there kind of waiting, a man came around. And he asked me if I had a key, and I said no. And then we both kind of turned and were going to walk back to the parking lot, and he came up behind me and threw me down and had his hands around my throat and was strangling me. And so at that point, he was in control. And so from then, he grabbed me by my ponytail and dragged me around to the parking lot and made me get in his car. And drove me out to the country. It was somewhere between Emporia and Cottonwood Falls, and raped me for a while, like an hour, and then left me there.
How did you get home?
Well, he had kind of like pointed off in a direction and said, if you walk this way, you'll get back to town. And so I started walking, and I was, just terrified, But eventually I came to a house, and I knocked on the door, and a man answered the door, which was also, scary. That was probably one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. And here, but he was very sweet. He was very kind. He opened the door and let me in and let me call my dad. He then gave me a ride home, a ride back to Emporia. He was very sweet. And so when I got home, I didn't tell my dad on the phone what had happened, but he knew, and he knew enough that he had called my mom, and my mom was there waiting with him. And my mom had also called SOS and had an advocate waiting at the hospital for us.
And did the SOS advocate help you guys report the incident to the police?
Yes. So we went to the emergency room first, and they did a rape kit. And then after that was over, I sat down with an Emporia Police Department officer and, recounted the events of that night. And once they found out that he had taken me outside of Emporia city limits, then they had a sheriff's deputy come in, and I had to tell the whole thing over again to him. And during all of that, I wouldn't allow my parents to be in the room. I couldn't handle them knowing the details of what had just happened. So my SOS advocate sat with me during that whole time and held my hand and helped me get through that.
How did the sheriff and the police department end up catching this guy?
So my attack was in July, and so after the next morning, they found the man's house that I walked to and kind of retraced my steps back, and were able to find the crime scene. That night I had been wearing a satin ribbon in my hair, and they found that ribbon there. And so they were able to corroborate my story. And then he actually raped 2 other women in Emporia a few months later. And one of the women knew him and worked with him at IBP and was able to identify him. So all 3 of us reported similar events, and they were able to connect the dots and arrest him.
And he went to trial for this.
Yes.
Did you have to be a part of that?
Yes. In a lot of ways, the trial was just as traumatic as the event. I mean, because, while I was being raped, I was in shock. I was checked out. I wasn't, really super present. But during the trial, you have to be very present. You have to be able to say in detail what happened, the timeline. And you have to do that in front of everyone, like in front of my parents. That was my parents' first time hearing exactly what happened. there was a jury. He was there, so I just say all of that in front of him. You don't get to be checked out during the trial. You have to be there and feel it all again in front of everyone. So that, it was really hard, but because I did that and because the 2 other victims did that, he's still in prison and he doesn't get to hurt anyone. So.
How did this affect you? How did the trauma of this event affect you?
Well, I mean, it really fucked me up. I was 16. I was just a kid, and I didn't, know anything. I just started dating, and it just completely destroyed my trust in everyone, and men for sure, and just everyone. And I was scared. I was scared to go out by myself. I'm still scared to go out, and walk at night by myself. And I just emotionally cut myself off from everything for years.
How did you cope with that as you were cutting yourself off from people and those feelings?
Well, I started using meth, that happened the summer between my sophomore and junior year. And I remember being in a junior class and had been up for, I'd been up for a while. And so I graduated high school a semester early because I was in all honors classes before that and got really good SAT scores. And so I was able to graduate early. But then I just really dove headfirst into meth. And, it's really embarrassing to think about, but, when you're doing meth, you get just laser focused on stuff, and you don't have anything else to think about. You're either focused on how you're going to get more meth or what you're going to do, when you're on the meth. And plus it's obviously very illegal, so you have a very small group of people that you associate with. So I was able to, kind of isolate myself and not talk to a lot of people. And so I'm horrified at some of the situations that I put myself in, but I just would do anything to not have to think about what had happened.
How long did you use meth to kind of push away those feelings?
I think about 4 years. I mean, kind of slowly starting and then really, and then it kind of tapered off. And I was able to actually quit because I had a friend who, his name's Jason, and he lives in Manhattan, and he, was like, you gotta stop doing this. And so he had moved into a new house and was looking for a roommate, and he was like, why don't you move up here with me? You can just hang out for a little while and detox and do what you need to do to get yourself clean. And I did. I slept for a whole month, and after a little while he was like, okay, it's time to get a job, So I got a job and worked there for a while, and I was able to quit doing meth.
And after meth, were you able to start coping with those feelings in a more healthy way?
Oh no. I wasn't ready to face it yet. So I basically traded meth addiction for alcoholism. I started drinking pretty heavily, and at first it was like, oh, it's just the fun, party girl. The house that I was living with Jason in Manhattan, we were really good friends with a bluegrass band, and they would have practice, and the bottle of Kentucky Deluxe would be sitting on the table, but I was always the one to like pick it up and pass it around, and at parties and weddings and funerals, everyone knew that I had a flask in my purse, and I could kind of pass it off as like, oh, this is just fun drinking, but it wasn't. And normally at any event like that, I was already drunk when I got there because I developed a lot of anxiety, and so I would just get pretty toasted before I would even go out. And then by the end of the night, I was blacked out. I blacked out a lot, and I also got 2 DUIs during that time, and thankfully didn't ever hurt anyone, but easily could have.
Were there any other ways that you coped in unhealthy ways?
Yeah. I kind of collected them all. I was also a cutter or self-mutilator. I had a spot on my thigh that I would get a razor blade and just make a series of little cuts, and a lot of times my entire, like from my hip to my knee, was just covered. I do a little section, and then the next weekend have a rough day and do another little section. And a lot of people don't really understand that, and I guess I don't really either, but it's a way to bring the pain that you're feeling inside out and just manifest it on your body. And I remember being in a work meeting one time, the morning after like a pretty gnarly cut session, and I had dried blood on the bottom of my foot because the blood had run all the way down my leg, and I hadn't got that wiped off good enough. And so I looked down in a meeting, and there was just dried blood all over my foot. And that was kind of a wake-up moment. I think I quit doing it shortly after that, but I did it for a long time, and I have a lot of scars.
Obviously looking at you today, talking with you today, something must have clicked or changed with you, because the woman I talked to today isn't the woman that you're kind of describing, that was, deep in those addictions. And, when were you able to, when did you start, when did you decide that you wanted to overcome that, that need to push away the trauma and face it so that you could overcome it?
It was about 5 years ago that I really started to just be sick of it, and I knew that I had to face it. So on May 8th, 4 years ago, I quit drinking, which was really hard. I had checked myself into the emergency room and did medically assisted detox, and had a lot of help from my family and from my boyfriend Joel. And that's when, the healing really started. I I didn't want to be blacked out anymore. I didn't want to push it away anymore. I was ready to deal with it, you know, because all that time I spent like pushing away the bad, I wasn't letting anything good come in, you know, I wasn't living my life. I wasn't, you know, letting good experiences happen. So I decided that I was done with that. And so I quit drinking. I also found a therapist that I really liked and that was really helpful. For a couple of years, I was seeing a therapist that was more of a lecture style therapist, and that didn't really work for me, but it took me a really long time to figure that out. And so after I quit going to him and started going to a new therapist, she was really helpful. She really helped draw all of those emotions out of me and make me look at them and sit with those feelings, and that was extremely helpful.
Was it easy to confront those emotions even when you were ready to do it?
No, and it's still not easy. It's still like a daily struggle. Another thing that has helped a lot is that I'm finally in a healthy relationship. After the attack, up until 7 years ago, I didn't have a relationship with it. Like, I would date guys for a few months, and then, you know, once it got to the point where it was like you had to start really getting to know each other, I was like, nope, I don't want to do this. And so, you know, now being in a relationship with Joel, I'm able to be vulnerable, which is really hard. And I've learned to love him and let him love me, which was never even possible before. So.
What do you want people who are watching this video to know?
I think, first of all, if you are sexually assaulted or raped or abused, report it to the police. And my situation, I feel, is very unique in that I did report it, and he was caught, and he was put in prison, and he's still in prison. I know that that is rare, and I've actually carried a lot of guilt around because of that. So many victims report their abuse, and then, you know, nothing happens. But if you do report it, you know, even if they're not caught right away, or, you know, you can still start to prove a pattern of abuse. So if it ever happens to someone else, they can go back in the police records, and if that record is there, then they can establish that pattern and get more jail time, or, you know, obviously, you know, the man who attacked me has been in prison this whole time, and I've still been a mess. So that doesn't fix everything, but it does help knowing that he's in prison, and that he's not hurting other women, because he would be. He's the kind of person who won't stop.
Would you have been able to do this by yourself?
No. You have to have help. And whether that's, you know, your family or a therapist, or, you know, services through SOS, you can't do this alone. And people want to help. And as soon as you know, let people start helping you, you can really start to heal from your trauma.
What's been the most, or what have you learned about trauma since going through your experience?
It doesn't go away. It's always there. You can't run from it. You can't hide from it. You can't drown it in a bottle of whiskey. It's always going to be there. So the sooner that you can face it and deal with it, the sooner that you can move on and be happy in your own life. And that's how you get your power back. And that's how you take back the night.
Thank you so much, Kayla. That was beautiful. It was raw. It was honest. Thank you so much. Sherry Crisp is the victim advocate for our underserved populations, and she will be discussing human trafficking. So how does human trafficking fit back into Take Back the Night? Because trafficked sex is coerced sex. Coerced sex is assault. Therefore, their night needs to be taken back too. So without further ado, I will let Sherry go tell us more about human trafficking.
Thanks for having me here, Jen.
Thank you.
So human trafficking is a horrific human rights violation. And due to the extreme trauma and complex needs a survivor may have, it is important to have supports available to provide assistance that meets the individual's needs. Those needs can be very complex. They can be ranging from housing, clothing, medical attention, replacing legal documents, and counseling. Human trafficking victims are lured online, at shopping centers, bus stations, outside youth homeless shelters, in the libraries, or through their friends with peer-to-peer recruitment. The average age of victims in Kansas for girls is 12 to 14, and for boys is 11 to 13. Human trafficking in America is not limited to rundown brothels or fueled by creepy middle-aged men, as depicted by Hollywood. Human trafficking is proliferated at music festivals we readily attend, and is disguised behind the facade of Tinder dating profiles we eagerly swipe past. Traffickers can literally be anyone, and our indifference towards recognizing their presence in our society allows them to continually deceive us. So what is the difference between sexual assault and sex trafficking? Sexual assault is any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the consent of the recipient. It includes sexual acts against people who are unable to give consent, either due to age or lack of capacity, such as being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Sex trafficking means recruiting, harboring, transporting, or providing a person to engage in a sex act in exchange for money or something of value, such as food, clothing, shelter, or college tuition. Trafficked persons are particularly susceptible to sexual assault and exploitation. Traffickers commonly use sexual violence as a tool to assert power and control over women, children, and men, regardless of the type of trafficking they are engaging in. Sexual harassment, which may include requests for sexual favors and obscene and suggestive language, is not only unlawful in its own right, but it can also lead to sexual assault. Neither human trafficking nor sexual assault has a single perpetrator or victim profile. Trafficking and sexual assault victims and perpetrators can be found among the ranks of men, women, transgender persons, minors, seniors, and persons with disabilities. Furthermore, both traffickers and perpetrators of sexual assault largely prey upon marginalized populations such as immigrants, minorities, economically disadvantaged persons, LGBTQ individuals, and persons with disabilities. There is a common misconception that sexual violence occurs only in sex trafficking. Although not all people who work in the sex industry are trafficked, those that engage in commercial sex industry, including trafficking victims, are at an extremely high risk of sexual assault. However, the unfortunate truth is that sexual violence occurs in almost every type of trafficking situation, including the commercial sex industry, servile marriages, and in cases of forced labor. In all of these situations, it's important to remember that no one agrees to be sexually assaulted or trafficked, despite appearances of consent at various stages of trafficking or sexual assault. Examples of the ways in which sexual assault can occur and be overlooked during the course of different types of trafficking situations include the commercial sex industry, domestic violence and servile marriage, and the workplace. In the commercial sex industry, although not all people who work in the sex industry are trafficked, those that are engaged in the commercial sex industry are at an extremely high risk of sexual assault. Because sex work is so stigmatized, sexual assaults suffered by sex workers are both underreported and undervalued. In domestic violence and servile marriages, there are an increasing number of cases in which traffickers force their intimate partners and spouses to perform services and labor, such as domestic work, working at family businesses, or sex work. Often, the trafficking victim is emotionally manipulated, coerced, or forced into having sex with his or her intimate partner, trafficker, or other individuals. For the LGBTQ communities in particular, marital rape and intimate partner sexual violence are underidentified and underreported. In the workplace, sexual assault is underreported and underidentified. Workplace sexual harassment occurs when the perpetrator of the assault and/or the trafficker is also the victim's employer, and the harmful act occurs on the job. This definition encompasses situations in which the perpetrator is a coworker or even non-employee, such as a customer, if the employer knew or should have known. So how can you prevent becoming a victim of sex trafficking? When you go out in groups of friends that you trust. Keep an eye on your drink. Traffickers look for opportunities to impair your judgment. This can take the form of buying you drinks that may be laced with drugs or adding drugs to your drinks while you are not paying attention. Be wary of instant love. Traffickers who shower potential victims with attention, affection, and gifts on their first meetings are known as Romeo pimps. They establish an emotional attachment right away and will be asking probing questions to find out if you are alone, have a loving family, or would be willing to hook up. These questions are common tactics traffickers use to manipulate potential victims by offering false love to those that appear to be isolated or do not have close family or a friends network. Human trafficking and sexual assault are both traumatic crimes, premised upon the power, control, and abuse and exploitation of another human being. Sexual assault can be verbal, visual, physical, or anything that forces a person to be subjected to or engage in unwanted sexual contact. Examples of this include inappropriate touching, rape, attempted rape, child molestation and abuse, incest, exhibition, and fondling. In 2019, the human trafficking hotline saw a nearly 20% increase in the number of victims and survivors who contacted them directly about their own situations. They identified 22,326 trafficking victims and survivors. They had 11,500 situations of human trafficking. They identified 4,384 traffickers and had 1,912 suspicious businesses. Hearing directly from the person gives the best information and an avenue to provide meaningful help, whether that be finding a safe place to stay the night, an attorney, a trauma counselor, transportation, or even law enforcement intervention. Human trafficking is becoming more and more common in our society, and knowing the signs and the red flags of what to look for when it comes to human trafficking is the best way to prevent human trafficking. I want to just thank Jen for allowing me to have the opportunity to talk a little bit and give just a brief overview on human trafficking. If you have any questions or any concerns, please reach out to SOS. I'd be glad to answer those questions at any time.
And thank you so much for joining me on the couch, being my co-host, and doing that lovely piece on human trafficking. Her passion is real, people. This is not forced. She is an amazing person and an amazing advocate. We will continue our discussion with underserved populations with Sage Weidenbach. She will be presenting on assault in the LGBT community. 43.8% of lesbian women and 61.1% of bisexual women have experienced rape. 26% of gay men, 37.3% of bisexual men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking. In a study of same-sex male relationships where both partners identify as male, only 26% of men called the police for assistance after experiencing near lethal violence. Transgender survivors are more likely to experience intimate partner violence compared to those who do not identify as transgender. So what are some of the factors that contribute to such high rates of violence but very low reported numbers? Sage Weidenbach is a former member of ESU Pride, and they will now go further into detail on sexual assault within the LGBT community. Sage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Sage Weidenbach. My pronouns are they, them. I am a sociology major at ESU as well as a survivor of sexual assault. I will be discussing why people in the LGBTQ community are at higher risk and more vulnerable to experiencing sexual assault. I will be talking about grooming, the culture of hypersexuality, and why we are urged to participate in that. The cycle of poverty, unemployment, and housing discrimination, why assault goes unreported, and then issues with policing, and then the topic of intersectionality. LGBTQ is not a monolith, so there are different layers to different people's experiences because we all have different experiences, and that varies in general, let alone when you get into other marginalized identities layered on top of that. I know that there was already a blanket trigger warning, but just to check in again, please listen to yourself. If you need to step away, you can. This is not easy for me to talk about, and I know it's also not easy as an audience. So if you need to step away, take care of yourself, please do that. And I hope you get something from it otherwise. You'll notice that my examples build off of one another, which just goes to show that this risk of violence to our community is systemically reinforced. So on the topic of grooming, just to give a brief explanation of that, grooming is often used to discuss power dynamics. So it's often used for adults pursuing children as their targets and victims by means of building trust with them and inviting them in their community and building trust so that they can then take advantage of them. But it's not always adults with children. It can also be any power imbalance. So just so you know that that's what that is before I go into it. People in the LGBT community are at risk for that grooming because so many of us are cast out by our families and our communities. We are always searching for people to take care of us and to be there for us and to believe us. And when you don't have that support system, that leaves you very vulnerable to people who know exactly how to find you when you're vulnerable and take advantage of that and build your trust and harm you. On top of that, I know from my generation, I have grown up with the internet. And for a lot of people in the LGBTQ community, the internet has been a safe haven because that's where we can all go and talk about our experiences that we might not be able to talk about in our homes. And that, of course, with the uncertainty of the internet, opens kids up to a lot of risk and people that are ready to take advantage of them. On top of that, there is a culture of hypersexuality within the LGBTQ community as well as enforced upon the community. Unfortunately, the way homophobes see us is only by our sexual acts. And it's hard not to internalize that. There's a culture of having to prove your sexuality because how can you know if you haven't had sex with somebody of the same gender? And so that's easy to internalize and put yourself more at risk, which is not to say that it's their fault, but that systemic issue leads people to pursue things that they normally wouldn't, just because they feel like they need to do that to be a part of something. And that mindset of hypersexuality that is internalized is taken advantage of by abusers, because if you're so willing, then it's easier to make you a target. We also are at higher risk of being in poverty, and we're at risk of experiencing workforce and housing discrimination, and as well as homelessness. There unfortunately are discriminatory laws that can prevent us from receiving housing or receiving employment, and we're not really protected as well as we should be from getting fired just for coming out. So that, of course, can lead to homelessness very quickly. And when you're out in the elements with nowhere to go, nowhere to be safe, you're at much higher risk for being scouted out by people ready to harm you. And then homelessness doesn't just come from that workforce discrimination and that housing discrimination. it starts very young when families decide that they would rather have a homeless child than a gay child in their home. A lot of people in the LGBTQ community turn to sex work when they're not able to have a stable job or stable housing. This also goes off of that culture of hypersexuality because it's already so ingrained that that is a central part of our identities, that that's the easiest thing to go to. Sex work definitely needs to be decriminalized because if you are harmed while performing sex work and you try to get help, you could also be incarcerated rather than your perpetrator. And I, of course, respect and support sex workers, but unfortunately, consent cannot exist when you have to do this or else you're not going to eat tonight. And so decriminalizing sex work is definitely the first step to making it easier for people to seek the help they need until we have a system where we don't have to sacrifice consent for our survival. On top of that, it can be very difficult to report because of the risk of incarceration, because of the risk of police interaction, because until 2018, Kansas was one of 34 states in the US where it was legal for a police officer to have consensual sex with someone in police custody. And I put consensual sex in quotes because consent cannot exist in a power dynamic such as that. So some things to do to prevent this, it has to start at home. It has to start with families accepting their children and making sure that they're loved and have a place where they can go and be safe so that they don't have to reach out to people they don't even know for support. They have it at home. They have that support. They have that love and care. And they don't have to go to just anybody who pretends to care about them just to take advantage of them. So it has to start there. On top of that, it's important to have comprehensive sex ed, including teaching kids about grooming and consent so that we know right out the gate, this is how we assert our boundaries and this is how we know when other people are trying to take advantage of our vulnerability. Decriminalizing sex work, as I already said, is definitely a big step toward making things safer for people. So even if you do have to survive off of sex work, you can do so safely and you won't face consequences because you were harmed while you were a sex worker. And then changing laws to prevent discrimination in the workplace and in housing so that we have places to stay, we have places to work. And changing legal definitions because unfortunately, one of the things that turns people away from reporting is that the definition is rape is penis vagina. And it's kind of hard to report that if you go and they tell you a law wasn't even broken because your abuser has the same genitalia as you. So there are a lot of things that need to be done in order to prevent this. But it definitely starts with showing support for the people in the LGBTQ community around you and starting in the home to create acceptance so that we don't have to go elsewhere for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sage, for that very detailed, insightful. I know I learned a lot.
It was great. Sage shared a lot of information that's very important for everyone in our community to know. And so I just can't thank Sage enough for being willing to come tonight and share that.
Absolutely. We really need to use what platform we might have to shine the light on any underserved community that is also facing horrible trauma and not feeling safe to report it. If anyone ever feels the need to reach out, please don't hesitate. 1-800-825-1295. We have extra advocates standing by. We're now going to hear from another survivor. And while it is important to listen to survivor stories and honor what they went through, they don't owe you their story either. So we are very, very blessed that our survivors were brave enough to be this vulnerable and to share. The ability to be vulnerable is not easy, which makes this even more amazing. So thank you, Alyssa, and I will let you begin.
All right, so like she said, my name is Alyssa Gehring. My story starts out where I was hanging out with my boyfriend at the time, and it was in July, it was summer, we were having a bit of a kickback, just kind of hanging out. I was 18 years old, and this was on the evening of July 13th, 2019. We were all just kind of hanging out, having a good time. And the guy who raped me, I will not say his name, as currently I am going through the court process right now. But he worked at a restaurant in Halstead, Kansas, which is where it happened, was in Halstead. And we had been to the restaurant multiple times. We had no reason not to trust him. He was an acquaintance of ours, and he was going to buy my boyfriend and all of us alcohol since we legally couldn't buy it ourselves. And he said that he had been drinking that night, so he didn't want to drive the alcohol to us, so he said we could come pick it up. My boyfriend felt bad, didn't want him to think that, we were just using him for that. So he went and picked him up and brought him to the place where we were having our kickback, just trying to be nice. He brought over a 24-pack of Bud Light beer, and he also brought a pre-mixed jug of strawberry margarita mix, as well as a bottle of tequila. I chose to have a cup of the margarita mix because I wasn't planning on drinking very much that evening. And after having that about a measuring cup size to drink, I kind of started to feel a little off, wasn't really sure what was going on. I didn't feel very good. So I stopped drinking. Everyone around me was taking shots of tequila, and I decided that, I wasn't really wanting to do that because I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like I was in my right mind. The man who raped me, he said, well, why don't you just take one, just kind of to be with the rest of us. So I leaned the bottle up to my lips to act like I was going to drink some, and then I was going to put it back down. And I think he recognized that I wasn't actually going to drink it, and he knocked the bottle back, and I got quite a bit of tequila down my throat, which made me very uncomfortable. About 10 minutes after this happened, I went to the bathroom because I felt very sick, very nauseous. I was on the bathroom floor for probably about an hour and a half, throwing up, trying to catch my bearings. I could barely hold myself up. I didn't understand why I didn't feel like I knew where I was. I was very disoriented. And my boyfriend came in, he picked me up off the bathroom floor, took me to his bed, said, hey, you need to go to sleep. You obviously aren't feeling well. I'll come in and check on you in a couple minutes. Couple minutes goes by, someone comes in the room. I'm barely awake, still kind of in this groggy state, not really sure what's going on. And all of a sudden, someone jumps on top of me. I just figure, my boyfriend's drunk. He's just having fun, not a big deal. I, of course, cannot form words. I can't move my body. I'm not sure why. I kind of mentally start freaking out because I'm not sure why I can't move, why I can't speak. Then all of a sudden, the sheets got ripped off of my body. My pants got pulled down. I didn't know what was going on. I started to really mentally freak out, but I couldn't scream. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't manage to get a single noise out. And I tried so hard to get myself to move so that I could have more control of the situation. And I just wasn't able to. And he grabbed my ankles, dragged me to the edge of the bed, proceeded to then undress himself, and then started to rape me. This lasted for about maybe 3 to 4 minutes. Then someone opened the front door, which was very loud, and it spooked him. And he quickly pulls up his pants. My legs dropped because he was holding them up. And as he walks to the door and opens it, the bathroom light shined on his face, and I realized that it was not my boyfriend, but that it was the guy who we had trusted and who we had thought, would have never have done anything like this. And then later that morning, I was woken up again to someone coming in the bedroom, and once again it was him, and he grabbed me by my ankles again, lifted my legs up, and proceeded to rape me a second time. I sadly do not remember the ending of that one. I have no idea what happened after that. All I know is that I fell asleep. At about 10 o'clock that morning, my boyfriend came into the room and asked me why I didn't have any pants on, why I was halfway naked, why I was looking the way I did. And I just started crying because I didn't know how to answer his question. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do because I was just so freaked out because I still wasn't really able to form words. My body was still really heavy. I still didn't have any control over my actions, what I was doing. And then come to find out, he had put roofie in the margarita mix that he had pre-made, which is what had caused me to be physically completely limp and to not be able to speak or anything like that. And also the fact that he had put enough roofie in that milk or in the jug of margarita mix that had I drank any more, there was a risk that I could have gone into a coma and could have been completely unconscious and not have had any way of knowing anything that had happened. And it was so terrifying because at first I couldn't truly wrap my mind around what had just happened. And we had been promised that if we went to lunch at the restaurant that next day, that he would pay for our meal since we had let him come and hang out with us that night. So we went to the restaurant, and typically, he would sit with us and talk with us and have a conversation and everything else. But that day, he wouldn't come anywhere near us. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at my boyfriend. He did not talk to any of us. And when we left the restaurant, he kept looking at me, and he was very depressed and just very sad and looked very apologetic. And the moment that I saw him, everything started to come back, and I started to remember more and more details. Things were becoming less and less fuzzy. And I recognized, I've just been raped. And I didn't know how to process it or what to think about it or what to do with that information. All I knew is that I was terrified. And I just wound up breaking down in tears because, at 18 years old, I was just about to start my senior year of high school. I wasn't sure how to deal with that, how to manage that, how to work through all of those feelings. And then that next day, which would have been Sunday, my parents were out of town and they came back into town that Sunday. And I didn't know how to tell them because I was afraid I was going to be in trouble because I had stayed the night at my boyfriend's, which I wasn't supposed to do. But, at that point, I didn't really have much of a choice other than to do that because I was not in the right state of mind to drive home, let alone to walk somewhere by myself. And so when I got my rape kit done, when I was talking to my advocate and to the doctor, I didn't want my parents hearing what had happened because I knew that that was going to cause them so much pain and so much stress. And so I didn't want them to know the details of everything that had happened. And then just in December, we had a contested hearing, and that was the first time that I had seen him since it had happened. And it was so terrifying hearing the chains and the handcuffs as he's walking into the courtroom. And when I went up there and I had to testify against him and tell the entire story all over again and have my parents hear it and my grandparents hear it, it was terrifying because you have to talk in such grave detail of it can't just be, oh, he had sex with me. It has to be specifically, he put his penis in my vagina. And to say those things and to talk about that when you're in front of your grandparents and your parents and, you know, these people that you respect and look up to and would never expect to be having, like, I guess, a form of a conversation with them about that is so just unnerving. And to see their facial expressions and to see how hurt they are and hearing and learning this information, it just makes it that much harder. Because it's like you realize how not okay you are and how difficult this really is and how uneasy this really makes you feel as well as other people. And going through the court system and going through pressing charges and everything else, it's a sucky process and it takes forever. And the only reason that they caught him was because I called in saying that one of my friends had told me that he had been seen at the restaurant. And that's the only reason that he was caught when he was, is because I called the police department and was like, listen, I know he's here. I know he's been here. You need to get him because this is not just something to, you know, slack off on. This is something that, you know, needs to be taken care of right here, right now. Because the warrant wasn't put out for his arrest until May of 2020, and he was not caught until October 1st of 2020. And so that was a little over a year after everything had happened. And something that also kind of frustrated me is they weren't willing to tell me the entire truth. All I was told was for his side of the testimony was that, you know, he had just said that, you know, we had sex and, you know, that it was consensual, and that was all I was told. So the day before the contested hearing, I get told the full story that he had claimed that I had gotten up out of my boyfriend's room, had gone to him when he was getting ready to go to bed on the couch, had forced myself onto him, was trying to make out with him and kiss him, and then I grabbed his hand and told him, let's go to the bedroom, let's go have sex. And then I told him, don't tell anybody, you know, and his reasoning for me saying don't tell anybody was because I had a boyfriend, and that would, of course, mean that I was cheating on him. And I was just like, first of all, I would never, ever have cheated on my boyfriend. So I was just like, that's definitely did not happen. But I'm just like, you have a 5'2", about 110-pound, 18-year-old girl versus a 5'7", about 160-pound, 30-year-old man. I don't think that story is really believable, and that I would be able to force myself onto him. And so finding that out the day before my contested hearing scared me even more, because I was like, if he shares his story, there's a chance that, you know, my story might get pushed off to the side and they might believe him, because they might assume, oh, well, that makes sense that she would tell him not to say anything since she was with someone else. So I was really scared that, you know, that was going to be a problem. Right now, with the court case, I have offered him a plea deal of 10 to 12 years in prison while keeping all of the charges that he has, even though he should be in prison for 30 to 35 years. I realized that realistically for a plea deal that, at least 10 to 12 years is what I was willing to give. At the moment, he serves 2 counts of rape, a count of aggravated sodomy, and then the misdemeanor of furnishing alcohol to a minor. My biggest fear at this point is that if it does go to jury trials, which right now the trial is set for September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, which will mean that it will be 2 years and about 2 months after the initial rape happened, that being 18 years old, being a minor, I will be seen as, well, you were kind of asking for it because you were drinking alcohol underage. You trusted him. Like, that was your mistake for trusting him. That was your mistake for drinking underage. Kind of the constant thing that women seem to get of, well, what were you wearing? Well, you were drinking underage. Well, were you doing anything provocative that could have, made it to where he might have thought that that was okay? And even my attorney has discussed that with me, that, the jury might look at it as, well, you were drinking underage, so it's not entirely his fault for doing that, as you made the choice to drink the alcohol that he brought over. Like, you made the mistake of trusting him, so that's on you. Another thing is for me, I have always been the one person that's always been okay for everybody else. So I've learned very quickly to kind of push my feelings and emotions down and to just kind of be very more or less okay. And so for me to discuss it, I can talk about it and tell my story and what happened and not get super emotional about it. And so she's concerned because, the jury would expect someone to be in tears, someone to be scared, someone to be angry and aggressive. But I haven't, there are days where I definitely break down in tears because I think about the fact that that happened to me and I just still can't believe it. But there are other days where I'm just like, I gotta be tough because there's a lot of other people out there who, they didn't make it through it. They weren't able to survive through it. And what also I found out is that one of my best friends, if he was asking about her on the way to my boyfriend's house, and if it had happened to her, if she had been there, she probably would not be alive today because she would not have been able to have mentally and emotionally have handled that, because she struggles very, very strongly with depression and her body image, and she's had abusive boyfriends in the past. So in a weird way, I'm thankful that it was me and not her, because I know that I could handle it, and I've proven that, I can, for the most part, handle what had happened to me. And I also kind of think of it as a blessing as well, because me sharing my story has helped a lot of other people come out and share theirs as well. Because by me sharing mine, I'm taking away that thought of it's not okay to talk about, that it's not okay to address this, that it's not okay to, talk about this and to not be okay with this. Like, it's okay to not be okay, but it's also okay to express the way that this has made you feel. It honestly, screw making other people uncomfortable by you talking about this. Like, this is your truth. Like, this is your story, and you have every single right to be heard and to make it known. And sadly, in my case, there is about 15 other girls that he has raped or sexually abused, but none of them are willing to come forward about it. And a lot of them were females that worked at his restaurant. because most of his staff, like his wait staff, were females, and most of them have either been sexually assaulted or raped by him. And for me, it's very frustrating because, you know, I know how hard it is to come forward, but the fact that, you know, he's in jail right now behind bars, and, you know, I'm fighting for them. So I kind of wish, you know, that they would come up and come forward and share their stories. But I also recognize how difficult that is and how much strength that takes and how much vulnerability that takes. So I put no blame on them. I'm not mad at them. I'm not angry with them at all for not being willing to share. But I'm happy because even though they're not willing to share, they still have my back and they're still supporting me from behind the scenes. So just because they're not willing to get up on the stand next to me, they're still there and they're still supporting me and still making sure that I'm okay while I'm telling my story and telling my truth. And with my case, he's actually an illegal immigrant who has an expired work visa. So legally, he shouldn't even be in the United States anymore. So ICE, the government, controls ICE and works with deporting immigrants and them earning their green cards and stuff like that. So if we do go to trial, there's a chance that he could just be deported. If we lose, and there's a chance that if we win, he could be in prison for 30 to 35 years and then be deported. It's definitely terrifying to think that, you know, if he just gets deported, that he could literally be back in the States within the year. And that scares me because he knows where I go to college. You know, he knows the town that I'm originally from. And so it's really scary to think, you know, every time I hear about something happening here in Emporia, I get in my head and I worry because not only am I worried about the victim, but I'm worried about who was it? Was it him or was it someone else? And it's a very scary thought, and it truly is terrifying to, you know, think back to the fact that, oh my gosh, this happened to me. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was real life. This truly happened. I'm definitely someone who now struggles with insomnia and PTSD and severe depression and severe anxiety. And it's hard because I can no longer walk outside of my apartment and feel safe and feel comfortable. I'm always looking around me. I'm always watching the vehicles around me. You know, when I'm leaving campus or leaving my apartment or a friend's house, I always check the back of my car and I always check around my car. And I used to never really do that, but now I'm just constantly so scared and so nervous that it's impossible for me to not just do a quick double take just to make sure that I'm okay. If there's a car that's driving behind me while I'm on my way to my apartment, I won't turn into my apartment parking lot because I'm scared that they'll follow me into it and then they'll know where I live. And even walking around campus, if I hear someone walking behind me, I will look behind me and start speeding up, whether it's a female or a male, just because the idea of someone being behind me and having the opportunity to come up behind me makes me so nervous and makes me so uneasy. And so my ultimate goal with everything that I've gone through is to make rape less and sexual assault of any form less taboo, to make it a more talked about subject, to make it a more addressed subject, you know, to make it something that people are more or less okay talking about and having conversations about, because You know, I have done some research myself, and I've seen that almost 90% of cases, like, the charges get dropped halfway through because the victims are so tired and just don't want to do it anymore. And so for me, I've thought about that a couple times, and I've thought about, like, it would be so nice to just give up and to just be done and just not have to worry about it. But then I realize I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for the 15 other girls that he did something to. I'm fighting for the thousands upon thousands of other women and of other men that have gone through the same thing that couldn't come up and speak their truth in fear of being rejected and in fear of being looked at differently and being turned away. So because of that, I have made a promise and a commitment to myself and to those people to keep going and to do my absolute best to win this trial and to get him put behind bars, because nobody deserves to go through anything like that. I would never, ever wish what I have gone through or what anyone else like me has gone through upon anybody, because it is truly one of the most traumatic life experiences that anyone could ever go through.
Alyssa, thank you so much for sharing. And you brought up a really good point. You know, anyone who's under the consent of alcohol or drugs is not able to give consent. And that's an important point to know as, you know, as college age students and as young adults entering the world, is if you have a friend or sister or brother who is under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, it does not takes away their right to give that consent to that person. So thank you so much for sharing. I know you've touched a lot of lives tonight by sharing that story.
And as soon as we can be in person, I am giving you the biggest hug, and then we are going to destroy some Ben and Jerry's. Off camera, we had a very detailed conversation about Ben and Jerry's. So hugs and Ben and Jerry's. And to go back to consent, another thing is that people need to know is that that can be withdrawn at any time whatsoever. And when I was assaulted, I did consent. But thanks to lots of alcohol, I also blacked straight out. So for a long time, I didn't know I'd been raped because I had consented. But when I blacked out, consent was lifted and he should have left my room. Obviously, he did not. But it is what it is. I did see him on Facebook. He has gotten fat, bald. His skin did not clear up. His wife is leaving him. His acting career never took off, and he's still a waiter. Something else that Alyssa touched on was the victim blaming. And that is something that we are just going to have to change one conversation at a time. We don't say, well, why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why would we do that? It is not the responsibility of the person being attacked to not be attacked. It is the responsibility of the attacker to not attack people. So that is language that is going to have to change. And the thing that stands out to me most about Kayla and Alyssa is that even though this was so difficult, and what they have been through is horrific, and no, we wouldn't wish that on anyone else, they have worked very, very hard to make sure that this moment is not what defines their life. And having support can be the difference between not letting that moment define your life and spending the next couple of decades numbing that away with drugs and alcohol and any other substance.
And Alyssa, you said it perfectly. It's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
It is okay to have those moments where you're not okay, but it's important to have those resources to help you get through those moments that you're not okay.
Absolutely. Now we will hear from campus security. Zoshi Azarate is a graduate of ESU. She was an SOS intern and has been an officer with campus police since 2020. Her passion and sincerity shine through everything she does, and we appreciate the time she took to record a presentation for tonight to better help us understand the role of campus police in preventing sexual assault on campus and how they can support others.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Soshir Zate, and I'm a police officer with Emporia State University Police and Safety. I've been with Emporia State University for about a year and a half now. I graduated the police academy in August 2019, and I couldn't be happier. I work with a good group of people. We're pretty close-knit. Every day is a new experience, a new challenge, a new adventure, and I love the work environment. I'm here today to speak about sexual assault and how we handle cases that occur on campus. So a little bit about ESU Police and Safety. So our department is made up of 9 certified police officers. We have Chief Jerry Cook, Lieutenant Donald Schaefer, Sergeant Jared Schumann, Sergeant Pat Ford, Sergeant Steve Dahl, Corporal Hector Amato Anderson, Officer Soshir Zate, Officer Nolan Karis, and Officer Lexi Mers. ESU Police and Safety is located just east of the football stadium. We're at 1701 Rooster Drive. The station is open 24/7, 365 days a year. Sometimes it looks a little dark in there, but rest assured, we're open and we're here to serve you. An average day, we like to have at least 2 officers working per shift. If we're lucky, we get to have 3 officers per shift. Something that you may have noticed around campus is we have blue light phones. It's going to be a red post with white letters on it that say emergency and a pretty blue light right at the top. Those are there in case of emergencies. If you're anything like me, my phone is dead 99% of the time. Therefore, they're there for your, just for you to access a phone. Students, staff, and visitors at ESU are able to connect with ESU police at just a push of a button. They're easy to see, easy to find, and easy to use. So what is sexual assault? So sexual assault is an act in which a person intentionally sexually touches another person without that person's consent, or coerces or physically forces a person to engage in a sexual act against their will. So sexual assault revolves around the word consent. So was there consent? Consent is permission for something to happen or an agreement to do something. Consent has to be agreed by all parties involved. Consent must be freely given and informed, and a person can change their mind at any time. So just because consent was given at the beginning doesn't mean that it has to be continued out throughout the process. Consent can be taken away at any time. So at ESU in 2017, we had 1 report of sexual assault. 2018, we had 1 report, and 2019, we had 3 reports. Now, those numbers are extremely low and are not accurate at all. Sexual assault goes unreported the majority of the time. There's hundreds of reasons why victims don't report sexual assault. Here I've listed the top 10 that I found for not reporting sexual assault. Fear of retaliation, shame, reporting an incident to an official who did nothing, not significant enough to report, belief that the police could or would not do nothing to help, did not want to get the offender in trouble with the law, did not want family or friends to know, fear of the justice system, feel the crime was not serious enough, fear of lack of evidence, and feel that too much time has passed. So arriving on scene, as ESU officers, we take all of our calls serious, especially the sexual assault calls. With sexual assault calls, we like to have at least 2 officers involved. The 2 officers who arrive on scene will typically be the same 2 officers involved throughout the case. We understand that being a victim of sexual assault will be extremely traumatic. Therefore, officers try to limit how many times a victim has to retell their stories to strangers. Thankfully, as of last month, our department now has body cameras. With body cameras, officers will be recording any conversations that are being told. Also, officers are able to review footage to help improve their investigation. So, reporting sexual assault to an officer is a very personal decision that is the victim's choice. The victim can either choose to file a report or choose not to file a report. As officers, we do not make that decision for the victim. Victims must make their decisions. So if we get called out to a scene and the victim's telling us about sexual assault and then later decides she doesn't want to file the report or he doesn't want to file the report, they can take that back. So while on scene, we like to focus on safety, scene security. So as police officers, we want to make sure that no one at the scene needs a medical attention. If medical attention is needed, officers can get EMS en route. Just because EMS shows up does not mean that the victim has to go to the hospital. EMS can do the evaluation on the scene. Also, victims are allowed to decline EMS services. Your story, listen, so your story will be hard for you to tell us, but it's important that you provide as many details as possible. If the victim saw their assailant, we're going to need a detailed description of them. This will allow us to have a more successful search around the area. Some of the questions the officers will be asking will be really hard to answer and may not make sense at the time they are being asked, but the questions will help us investigate to figure out our next step. Be aware that if you would like to speak to an SOS advocate, we can arrange that for you. We want you to remember that this is your fight and we're here to investigate at your pace. So, arresting the suspect. As officers, we always want to make that arrest, but unfortunately that's not always the case. Many times after sexual assault is reported, the suspect either flees the area or the offender is unknown. Provide the victim with a resource packet. So the packet will contain an SOS 24-hour helpline, as well as their local phone number. The packet will also contain a couple brochures that speak about stalking and domestic violence and what the elements of those are made up of. In the past, I've had conversations with victims and they've told me that they were blindsided, having no idea that they were even in an abusive relationship. So domestic violence is not just physical. It can be sexual, emotional, financial, and psychological abuse. So the brochures that are being provided will help you have a better understanding of what those are. Within 72 hours, we will revisit with the victim. It's not just a one-time thing. Every victim, every case, every story is different. So depending on that officer and the victim, it could be one time, it can be 10 times, it can be 20 times within a week time span. At this time, we'll speak with the victim, ask them how they're doing, if there's anything else that we can help them with, and we'll ask them any more questions that we might have missed during the investigation. And if the victim remembers any little detail, this would be the time the victim can speak to the officer. Now, we do provide the victim with a business card. That business card will have the police officer's name who arrived on scene. It will have their badge number, their phone number, and their email address. And on the back of that business card, it's going to have their case number, which will link the officer to the victim to the incident. So that way, if the victim does have any questions and it's not within the 72-hour check, they can call us anytime. We're available 24/7. So goals. The officer's goals is the safety and protection of all victims in any call. We want to ensure all victims know that they matter and we are here to help. If possible, we arrest the assailant. Victim's goals is to survive the attack. We don't expect the victim to bounce back to normal in a couple days. We know that the victim will need time to heal, and we are here to help them through their fight. And if for any time they want to speak to an officer, even just to vent or just to speak, I mean, we're available 24/7. We do have services available for that. So something new to ESU. So I've been wanting to start up a self-defense course for students around campus for a while now. I've researched different universities around the US to see what self-defense courses were offered. One program that I absolutely fell in love with was the RAD systems. So what is RAD systems? So RAD stands for Rape Aggression Defense Systems. RAD systems is a system of realistic self-defense tactics and techniques. The RAD system is not a martial arts program. It is a comprehensive course for students that begins with awareness, prevention, risk reduction, and avoidance while progressing on the basics of hands-on defense training. The RAD systems is dedicated to teaching students defensive concepts and techniques against various types of assault by using easy, effective, and proven self-defense tactics. And I am more than happy to announce that I will soon be getting my certification to become a RAD systems instructor at ESU. So hopefully getting a class started up for fall of 2022, but with COVID and all that, it may get pushed back to 2023, but keeping my fingers crossed here. My overall goal for this is for students to have another tool under their belt before graduating. I want students to feel a sense of empowerment, and I want to create a safer future for our Hornet students. So RAD classes are going to be offered at no charge to ESU students, faculty, and staffers. The percentage of sexual assaults in Kansas continues to climb up. By helping ESU students prepare for a safer future, this could potentially help that number come down. And currently, RAD is being taught in over 400 colleges and universities across campus, and I'm excited to get on that list. Here are just some pictures of kind of what we do at RAD. I don't have a video of it. I haven't been sent to the course yet. Also with COVID, we had to do our 6-foot rule. And for any questions, comments, concerns, I'm available via email or phone. Thank you all for your time. Again, my name is Soshi Zotsit, and I'm with Emporia State University Police and Safety.
Thank you so much, Soshi. I have had the chance to work with Soshi and work with Jerry Cook, and honestly, I'm impressed. I really am. Their dedication is unmatched. They truly, truly care. And Soshi and I have some plans for next year, so that's going to be super fun. So please stay tuned. If over the next few days, there may be some social media events, Glass Blown Open is in town. Should you feel uncomfortable, scared, feeling like somebody's watching you, or just generally feels off, don't hesitate to reach out to campus security, call 911, reach out to EPD, call SOS, reach out to anyone that you think of if you need to. So that is it for Take Back the Night 2021. I have put together a list of community resources, everything from mental health, addiction, legal, and remember, it is okay to not be okay. Please reach out. We've got advocates standing by, 1-800-825-1295. And I have to thank again, Brian and Sandy for doing the technical wizardry and magic that made tonight occur, Sherry for co-hosting, all of the advocates in the office helped me with this beautiful set today, Sage for coming in, Carrie was our social media guru, couldn't have gotten anywhere with her. Catherine has spent the night monitoring questions. Who have I forgotten?
Kayla, Alyssa.
Kayla, yes, thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for sharing your stories, and for Soshi for her participation tonight as well. Just thank you, everybody. And thank you, everybody, for joining us in this new format this year as we adapt to our current pandemic.
Thank you, everyone who participated in the art portion of this event. When we go in person next year, I have a much bigger plan. So please stay tuned for more. Thank you so much and good night.
Good night.